The night I locked that boat ramp, there were 50 rich people screaming on the water, engines idling, lights flashing across the lake like we were filming some reality show nobody asked for. And I remember thinking, well, this is what happens when you poke an old man too many times. But before that night, before the cameras and the chaos, it was just me, my lake, and a promise my grandfather made 70 years ago. My name is Ethan Cole, and I live on a quiet lake outside a little town in northern Idaho. The kind of place where mornings smell like pine and damp earth, and you can hear loons calling before the sun even figures out its job. My grandfather bought this land in 1953, carved a boat ramp into the bank with his own hands, and wrote it right into the deed that locals would always have access to the lake, no matter how fancy the world got, no matter how people changed. He believed water belongs to the people who love it, not the people who can afford to control it. I thought that promise would outlive me. Turns out, I was wrong. For most of my life, this place was simple. Summers meant kids fishing off the dock, old-timers trading stories over coffee thermoses, and families launching their little aluminum boats to catch bass before breakfast. My late wife, Anna, used to organize a community fishing derby every June. Nothing big, just laughter, paper plates, cheap trophies, and kids who felt like champions. After she passed, keeping the lake open wasn't just about tradition anymore. It was about her. It was about honoring something good. Then she arrived. Her name was Madeline Hartwell, and she came in like a storm wearing perfume and expensive sunglasses, the kind of woman who smiled like every conversation was a business negotiation, and every person she talked to was either an obstacle or a tool. She'd barely unpacked her suitcases before she got herself elected president of the HOA. Big city confidence dropped right into a place that ran perfectly fine on handshakes and neighborly trust. She said words like modernization and development opportunity and economic vision with that calm, polished tone that makes people think maybe she knows better than us. Turns out, she didn't. 1 month in, she banned shoreline fishing on HOA property because it looked messy, said boats tied to old docks ruined the aesthetic, and complained constantly about what she called unregulated lake culture. That should have been our first warning. But we're small-town folks. We're patient, maybe too patient, and we figured she'd learn the rhythm of the place eventually. Instead, she doubled down. One evening at a community meeting, she rolled in with a projector and a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Big glossy images splashed across the wall, sleek dining platforms floating on ritzy lakes back east, wine glasses catching sunset light, menus with prices that made my eyebrows twitch. Then she said it like she was offering us a gift instead of a disaster. We're going to build a premier floating restaurant. We'll bring elegance to this underutilized lake. Boat valet service. Exclusive access. This will raise property values and give our community prestige. Some folks clap because the word prestige does strange things to people. Me? I raised my hand and said the simplest truth in the room. That boat ramp you're planning to funnel traffic through? That ramp is on my private land. It's been my family's since before this HOA even existed. She turned toward me with that rehearsed, polite smile wealthy people use when they think they're smarter than you. Sometimes progress requires difficult adjustments, Mr. Cole. The community's needs are bigger than individual sentiment. Individual sentiment. That's what she called 70 years of history. Construction started like an invasion. Trucks rolling in at dawn. Diesel fumes replacing the morning lake air, cranes whining over water that used to only echo with bird calls. And Madeline stood there in tailored clothes and big sunglasses, pointing like a queen at war with peace itself, directing workers who didn't care what lake memories they were drilling into. Then came the paywall. $25 just to use the ramp. Locals who'd fished there their whole lives suddenly treated like trespassers in their own story. I watched a kid, maybe 10, stand there in tears because his grandpa didn't have his wallet on him. I watched a widow get told she couldn't scatter her husband's ashes unless she paid. I watched the heart of our lake get fenced off by someone who didn't understand a single thing about it. And for the first time in a long while, I felt mad. Not the loud kind of mad. The quiet kind. The dangerous kind. The kind that doesn't fade overnight. But anger's not enough unless you do something with it. And I wasn't about to pick up a hammer or yell in the street. That's not who I am. See, I spent years as an engineer, and engineers learn something important. If someone builds something wrong, you don't scream about it. You study it. You learn where it's weak. Then you push on the exact spot it can't afford to break. So while Madeline walked around acting like a lake tyrant, I started digging. Old deeds, maps, environmental laws, county filings, the kind of boring paperwork that ruins empires if you're patient enough to read it. And what I started finding, well, let's just say it made the air feel lighter for the first time in weeks. Because for every ounce of arrogance she had, there was a mistake waiting to crush it. And that's where everything really began to change. You know that feeling when you've been pushed so far that something inside you just clicks? Not rage, not panic, just a steady kind of clarity like, all right, this is the fight I didn't ask for, but it's the one I'm meant to finish. That's where I was. The floating restaurant kept getting bigger, louder, shinier. Boats coming and going, waiters in starched uniforms smiling like they belonged there, like the lake had been waiting all its life just to serve wine to people who'd never loved it a day. Every night, I sat on my porch, watching lights shimmer across the water where Anna and I used to count stars. And I remember whispering, "Don't worry, honey, I'm not letting them take this." Problem is, when you push against money and ego, you better come prepared. The first real crack showed up in a stack of county records at 3 in the morning when most people are asleep, but stubborn widowers are powered by cheap coffee and principles. I found it buried inside environmental filings, or more accurately, inside all the filings that should have been there, but weren't. A commercial structure on natural water, handling grease, sewage, chemicals, and somehow there was no approved environmental permit. No thorough review. Just shortcuts. And shortcuts always tell you something about a person, that they don't believe the rules apply to them. So I made a call. Not dramatic, not loud, just careful. A quiet tip to the right agency with the right documentation attached. And a few mornings later, when a state inspector stepped off her truck with a clipboard and a calm little smile, I swear the lake took its first real breath in weeks. Within an hour, engines shut down, workers stood around confused, and Madeline stormed over like a thundercloud in heels. She came into my yard like she owned oxygen, waving paperwork, voice shaking between fury and panic. "This is harassment, Ethan," she snapped. "You don't understand the bigger picture here. You're standing in the way of progress." I took a sip of coffee, so slow you'd think time stopped to watch. "All I understand," I said, "is you don't get to poison my lake." Her jaw tightened. Her hands shook. But she left for the moment. Funny thing about fights, the more pressure the opponent gets, the more they show you what they're truly made of. Within days, suddenly the environmental stop order disappeared like it never existed. Construction roared back to life. And this time, she brought private security, guys in tactical vests walking around like we'd turned into a war zone instead of a lake where kids chase minnows and grandpas fall asleep on lawn chairs. Then things got personal. An anonymous harassment complaint, a sheriff's car in my driveway, accusations that I'd threatened workers, that I'd been unstable, that I was some hostile old man terrorizing her project. Absolute fiction, but it leaves a mark when someone paints you crazy on official paper. A few HOA members, the newer ones mostly, started looking at me differently, like maybe I'd lost my mind instead of defending my home. That's when I realized something critical. Madeline wasn't just building a restaurant. She was building power, influence, control, and she didn't care who she had to trample to keep it standing. So I tightened my circle and dug deeper. One morning, walking my property lines like my grandfather always told me to do, I found disturbed soil near the old iron boundary stakes, fresh footprints, expensive hiking boots, someone scouting lines that weren't theirs to touch. That was the moment the anger stopped being theoretical and turned sharp. She wasn't guessing anymore. She was planning to take my land legally, twisting laws she half understood, throwing around words like adverse possession as if simply saying them out loud made them true. I called in a professional survey team. GPS confirmed, documented, notarized, stamped. Every inch of that boat ramp belonged to my family. Not 90%, not 50, 100. Mine. Locked in time before the HOA ever existed. And while the surveyor shook his head at the audacity of whoever had been snooping around those markers, something else slid into place inside me. Proof is peace when you're up against lies. But the darkest discovery hadn't surfaced yet. Late one night, staring at financial filings until the words blurred together, I found something that made my stomach drop. A loan for $100,000. Not secure by her house. Not backed by private investors. No, it was secured by our HOA's community spaces. The pool where the neighborhood kids learned to swim. The clubhouse where we'd held memorials and birthdays and quiet winter gatherings. The courts where old friends kept themselves moving because life slows down too easily otherwise. She'd gambled our entire community future to finance her empire on water. No vote, no disclosure, no permission, just ego stapled to paperwork. That's when fear entered the picture for me. Not fear for myself, fear for my neighbors. Fear for single parents who saved every year just to keep their kids in that pool. Fear for retirees whose lives are stitched into this place. Fear that if her fantasy failed, a bank would swoop in and take pieces of our lives like they were repossessed furniture. And once fear has a direction, it becomes determination. I gathered the people who still believed in this town the way Anna used to, folks with weathered hands, tired eyes, and stubborn hearts. We met inside the little coffee shop downtown, the one that smells like roasted beans and worn wood and quiet loyalty. I laid everything on the table, the loan, the risk, the poison trust. And the room went silent in that heavy silence gets when truth isn't just shocking, it's unacceptable. What do we do? Someone finally asked. And I said something simple. We stopped pretending this is someone else's problem. The plan wasn't violent. It wasn't reckless. It was structured, legal, patient, the way my grandfather would have done it. I documented everything. I lined up attorneys. I filed what needed to be filed. And most importantly, I installed what would become the most satisfying gate I have ever seen in my life. A hydraulic, steel-reinforced, immovable wall across the only access point her business depended on, installed right there on a land that belonged to my family and nobody else. Quiet, lawful, absolute. Friday afternoon, just as fancy cars rolled up and customers in expensive clothes rehearsed their smiles, the gate came down with a smooth metallic hum. Final as a full stop at the end of a sentence. Boats stalled. Confusion turned to anger. People shouted into phones like cell service could change property law. And 20 minutes later, here she came. Madeline stepped out of her car furious enough to set the gravel smoking, heels stabbing into the dirt, voice already raised before she even got close enough to see my face. "You open this gate right now," she shouted. "You're destroying my business." I just looked at her and said softly, "No, I'm protecting my home." That weekend cracked her perfect world wide open. At 2 a.m, cameras caught her trying to sabotage the gate like a desperate criminal in designer clothes. Sparks flying, curses breaking the quiet night air. Staff started quitting. Bills started bouncing. Investors started whispering. And for the first time since she arrived, the Queen of the Lake looked terrified. Because she could finally feel it. Her power wasn't real. Her control wasn't permanent. Her empire wasn't built on ownership. It was built on other people's patience. And that patience had finally run out. By the time Labor Day rolled around, the lake felt like a pressure cooker. The restaurant platform floated out there like a stranded ship. Lights on, but no soul left inside, while rumors whipped through town faster than wind on water. People whispered in the grocery store aisles, leaned closer in church pews, shared screenshots like currency. And for once, the town wasn't divided. They weren't arguing whether I'd gone too far. They were worried how far she'd gone. Then came the town meeting. I didn't want spectacle. I wanted truth laid out in daylight where fear has fewer shadows to hide in. But truth has a funny way of inviting spectacle all on its own. The community center filled to the walls. Neighbors I'd known my whole life, newer families who were still finding their place. Reporters tried to turn our pain into headlines. And somewhere in the back, the state investigators quietly watching everything. Madeline walked in late like she always did, dressed sharp, spine straight, eyes blazing with the determination of someone who still believed she could out-talk reality. She brought a lawyer this time, the expensive kind, and a pair of paid supporters holding handmade signs that somehow still smelled like fresh printer ink. She went straight to the front, didn't even glance my way, and launched into a speech that sounded like it had been rehearsed in a mirror. "This town is resisting progress," she said. "One stubborn man is sabotaging economic growth and destroying a business that would have put this lake on the map." A few people shifted in their seats, but nobody cheered. Then I stood up. No speech, no theatrics, just a simple folder and a lifetime of not backing down when it mattered. I laid out the loan documents, the illegal collateralization of community assets, the unpaid wages, the quiet legal tricks she'd hoped nobody would ever dig far enough to find. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. Truth sits heavy enough on its own. When I finished, the room didn't roar. It didn't clap. It just went silent. The kind of silence where people realized the ground they were standing on wasn't ground at all. It was thin ice they hadn't seen cracking beneath them. A detective stepped forward. "Mrs. Hartwell," he said calmly, "you're under arrest." I'll never forget the sound of those handcuffs. Not because it felt victorious, though I'd be lying if I said there wasn't a pulse of relief somewhere deep inside, but because it sounded like a full stop at the end of a sentence I never wanted to live in the first place. She didn't scream. She didn't fight. She just looked around like maybe the room would suddenly remember her version of the story instead. But nobody saved her this time. The gate stayed locked until the courts made everything official, until liens fell like dominoes, until the bank reclaimed that floating monument to ego, until the new HOA leadership untangled every bit of damage she'd quietly tied around the town's neck. And when it was over, when the platform finally disappeared down the far bend of the lake on the back of a tow vessel, I didn't cheer. I just breathed. The next morning, I called the crew back out and had that hydraulic gate dismantled piece by piece. No drama, no ceremony, just removal. By noon, the ramp stood open again, same as it had in my grandfather's time. Just gravel, water, sunlight, and the steady rhythm of boats sliding back into the life they'd always belonged to. And I swear the lake sounded different that day. Kids laughed louder. Engines hummed warmer. Old friends leaned against pickup trucks and didn't talk about lawsuits. They talked about fishing again, about weather, about normal things that mean everything when you've nearly lost them. Months passed. Life stitched itself back together in small, quiet ways. The HOA stepped aside from trying to rule the lake and went back to helping the people who actually lived around it. We brought back Anna's fishing derby, and it was bigger than ever. Hundreds of families, cheap hot dogs, kids chasing each other in the grass, the kind of joy that doesn't need money to exist. Somebody hugged me and said, "You saved this place." And I laughed because I didn't save anything. I just refused to let it be taken. But here's the honest truth people don't like to say out loud. I didn't walk away from all of it feeling heroic. I walked away older, tired in ways I couldn't sleep off. Because when you fight to keep something you love, you win differently than people think. You don't feel like a victor. You feel like a caretaker who nearly lost the thing you were trusted with. And maybe that's what responsibility really is. Every once in a while, I think about Madeline. I don't hate her. I don't wish anything more on her than what the law already handed down. I think she came here believing she was going to fix us without ever understanding we weren't broken. Power can do strange things to people. Desperation makes it worse. Somewhere along the way, she stopped seeing a community and started seeing an opportunity. And when you stop seeing people as people, damage gets easy. But the lake? The lake forgives faster than we do. Water settles. Life returns. Kids learn to cast fishing lines in the same sunlight their great-grandparents once stood under. And that's the kind of continuity humans can't manufacture, only protect. So yeah, one night, 50 wealthy diners screamed on a dark lake while a steel gate stayed exactly where it needed to be, and somehow that ridiculous, chaotic scene ended in something kind of beautiful. Not because a fight happened, but because a community remembered who it was. Now I'll leave you with this, because this isn't just a story about me and some stubborn woman with a grand plan. It's about every town, every neighborhood, every place where money tries to rewrite history or control what already belongs to the people who care about it. Do you think I went too far? Was she completely wrong? or just dangerously misguided? Should communities fight like this when something feels deeply wrong? Or does resistance sometimes cost more than it saves? Tell me what you think. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Share your own HOA or community battles, argue, disagree, debate. I want to know, because stories like this don't end on a lake in Idaho. They're happening everywhere. And maybe, just maybe, the next time someone tries to buy control over a place that was built on love, a few people will remember this story and stand their ground.